Ukraine launches 80 naval drones against the Russian Black Sea Fleet. 6 warships sink in one night. Naval warfare will never be the same. August 4th, 2025. The Black Sea, 12 nautical miles south of Sevastopol, at 11:47 p.m., darkness covered the water like a shroud. No moon, heavy cloud cover, visibility less than 200 meters, perfect conditions for what was about to unfold. Across a 40-mile front, 80 unmanned surface vessels, each no larger than a jet ski, began their approach toward the crown jewel of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Sevastopol Harbor, home to 3 frigates, 2 corvettes, 7 patrol boats, a submarine, and support vessels worth over $2.8 billion. The drones, designed and built in Ukrainian workshops using commercial components costing less than $60,000 each, carried 450 kilograms of military-grade explosives in their bows. They were controlled remotely via satellite links, guided by GPS coordinates accurate to within 3 meters, and programmed with one mission: reach the harbor, find targets, detonate on contact. This was not Ukraine's first naval drone attack. Over the preceding 18 months, isolated strikes had damaged Russian vessels, sunk landing craft, and demonstrated the viability of unmanned warfare at sea. But August 4th was different. This was a coordinated mass attack. 80 drones launched simultaneously from hidden positions along the Ukrainian coast. Time to arrive at Sevastopol between midnight and 1 a.m., when crew alertness would be lowest. Intelligence gathered from satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and human sources had identified every vessel's mooring location. Targeting packages were uploaded to each drone's navigation system, and fail-safes ensured that even if individual drones lost communication, they would continue toward their programmed coordinates. This was asymmetric warfare at its most audacious. 80 small boats, worth $4.8 million combined, attacking a fleet worth over $500 million times that amount. At 11:52 p.m., Russian coastal radar detected anomalous contacts, small, low to the water, moving at 40 knots. Initial reports classified them as possible debris or fishing vessels. By 11:58 p.m., the count had reached 30 contacts, then 50, then 70. Alarm spread through Sevastopol's Naval Command Center. This was no debris field. This was an attack. At midnight, the base went to full alert. Sailors rushed to battle stations. Deck guns were manned. Searchlights swept the harbor approaches. But in the darkness and confusion, identifying individual targets was nearly impossible. The drones, painted matte black and riding low in the water, were nearly invisible until they closed to within 400 meters. And by then, it was too late. At 12:03 a.m., the first drone struck. The Admiral Grigorovich, a Project 1135B6 frigate worth $450 million, was moored at Pier 4 when a naval drone slammed into her port side just below the waterline. The 450-kilogram warhead detonated with a force equivalent to 200 kilograms of TNT. The explosion tore a hole 6 meters wide in the hull, flooding 2 compartments instantly. Damage control teams rushed to seal bulkheads, but water poured in faster than pumps could evacuate it. The frigate listed 12 degrees to port within 3 minutes. At 12:11 a.m., a second drone struck the same vessel amidships. This time, the explosion ruptured fuel tanks, igniting fires that spread through 3 decks. The Admiral Grigorovich, one of Russia's most modern warships, was doomed. Her crew abandoned ship at 12:23 a.m. By 12:35 a.m., she had capsized and sunk, taking classified communications equipment, sonar systems, and millions of dollars in ordnance to the bottom. But the Admiral Grigorovich was just the beginning. At 12:07 a.m., 2 drones simultaneously struck the Admiral Makarov, another Project 1135B6 frigate. One hit the stern, destroying the helicopter deck and hangar. The second struck near the bow, collapsing the forward superstructure. Fires erupted across the ship. The captain, realizing his vessel was lost, ordered evacuation. By 12:40 a.m., the Admiral Makarov had settled on the harbor floor, her mast and radar arrays still visible above water, a tombstone marking where $450 million had died in 33 minutes. What would you prioritize if you commanded the defense? Type A for protecting the largest ships. Type B for trying to intercept the drones before they reach harbor. Let's hear your tactical call. At 12:15 a.m., panic turned to chaos. Russian forces, attempting to engage the drone swarm, opened fire with everything available. 30mm autocannons blazed, tracers arcing across the harbor. Heavy machine guns fired thousands of rounds into the darkness. But the drones were small, fast, and numerous. For every one destroyed, 3 more slipped through. And some Russian fire, poorly aimed in the confusion, struck friendly vessels. The patrol boat Raptor 34 was accidentally hit by fire from a coastal battery, killing 2 sailors and starting a fire that eventually scuttled the vessel. Friendly fire casualties, later suppressed by Russian authorities, would exceed 20 dead and 40 wounded. At 12:18 a.m., a Kilo-class submarine, the Krasnodar, surfaced at her mooring to attempt emergency departure. Submarines are vulnerable on the surface, and the Krasnodar was no exception. 3 drones, coordinating through their shared network, converged on her position. The first struck the sail, collapsing it and killing the bridge crew. The second hit the stern, damaging the propulsion system. The third detonated against the pressure hull amidships, opening the submarine to the sea. The Krasnodar, worth $600 million and carrying classified cryptographic systems, sank in 18 minutes. Only 19 of her 52 crew members escaped. The rest were trapped inside as the submarine settled onto the harbor floor at a depth of 42 meters, too deep for immediate rescue. At 12:25 a.m., the corvette Mercury, a Project 2380 vessel, attempted to make a run for open water. Her captain, realizing the harbor had become a death trap, ordered maximum speed. The corvette, capable of 27 knots, raced toward the harbor mouth. She almost made it. At 12:31 a.m., 2 drones intercepted her just outside the breakwater. Both struck simultaneously, one on each side, tearing holes below the water line that flooded the engine room. The Mercury lost power and began sinking. Her crew abandoned ship, scrambling into life rafts as the $350 million corvette slipped beneath the waves. She sank in water deep enough that salvage would be difficult and expensive, effectively a total loss. Russian forces fought desperately to stem the massacre. Helicopters lifted off, shining searchlights onto the water and directing fire from patrol boats. Shore batteries fired illumination rounds, turning night into flickering twilight. But the drones kept coming. Some were destroyed, their explosives detonating prematurely and creating geysers of water 20 meters high. But others adapted, their controllers rerouting them around concentrations of defensive fire. The AI-assisted navigation systems, crude but effective, learned from destroyed drones and adjusted approach paths in real time. This was not just a swarm attack. It was an adaptive swarm, one that became harder to stop with every passing minute. If you're following this revolution in naval warfare, subscribe now to make sure you never miss an analysis like this. At 12:42 a.m., the patrol boat Sergei Kotov, stationed as a harbor guard, became the 5th major casualty. 2 drones struck her within seconds of each other, the explosions so violent that the 400-ton vessel broke in half. She sank in less than 2 minutes, giving her crew almost no time to escape. 8 sailors went down with the ship. Survivors, pulled from the water by rescue boats, described the attack as surreal. Silent death racing out of darkness, explosions that came without warning, and a sinking so rapid that trained damage control was useless. The lesson was brutal. Against this type of attack, size didn't matter. Speed didn't matter. Only detection and destruction before contact mattered, and Russian forces were failing at both. By 1 a.m., the attack was winding down. Of the 80 drones launched, 62 had been destroyed by defensive fire, run aground, or lost to mechanical failures. But 18 had reached their targets. and those 18 had accomplished what conventional forces would have needed weeks of bombardment to achieve. 6 major warships sunk or damaged beyond repair, 2 frigates, 1 corvette, 1 submarine, and 2 large patrol boats. Combined value exceeding $2.8 billion. Russian casualties, initially reported as minimal, would eventually be confirmed at 94 dead and over 200 wounded. The Black Sea Fleet, already weakened by earlier losses, had just suffered its worst single-day defeat since World War II. The aftermath was a scene of devastation. Sevastopol harbor, once a symbol of Russian naval power, resembled a graveyard. Masts and superstructures protruded from the water where ships had sunk. Oil slicks covered thousands of square meters. Rescue operations continued for days, divers searching flooded compartments for trapped sailors. The Krasnodar submarine, resting on the harbor floor with 33 crew members inside, became a tomb. Salvage efforts to raise her were attempted, but eventually abandoned due to the risk of triggering unexploded ordnance. The wreck remains on the bottom, a steel coffin and a reminder of August 4th. Strategically, the attack shattered Russian confidence in their ability to defend critical naval assets. Sevastopol, protected by air defense systems, radar networks, and shore batteries, had been penetrated by weapons costing less than the annual salary of a single admiral. The asymmetry was humiliating. Ukraine, a nation with almost no conventional navy, had just crippled a fleet that had dominated the Black Sea for decades. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Russian sailors, knowing that drones could strike anywhere at any time, became hesitant to operate near Ukrainian-controlled coasts. Morale plummeted, and the Black Sea Fleet's operational tempo, already constrained, dropped further. Economically, the losses were catastrophic. Russia's shipbuilding industry, hampered by sanctions and technological limitations, could not replace the lost vessels quickly. The Admiral Grigorovich and Admiral Makarov frigates had taken 6 years each to build. The Krasnodar submarine required 8 years. Even with unlimited resources, replacing the fleet would take a decade. And Russia didn't have unlimited resources. Military budgets, strained by the war, could not absorb $2.8 billion in unplanned losses. Funds earmarked for new construction were diverted to salvage and repair. Programs for next-generation vessels were delayed or canceled. The attack didn't just sink ships, it sank Russia's naval modernization plans. For Ukraine, the success validated years of innovation and risk-taking. Naval drones, initially dismissed by military analysts as gimmicks, had proven devastatingly effective. The cost-effectiveness was staggering. $4.8 million in drones had destroyed assets worth $2.8 billion, a 580-to-1 return on investment. No conventional weapon system could match that ratio. The attack also demonstrated Ukrainian technical capability. The drones, built using commercial engines, 3D-printed components, and off-the-shelf electronics, represented a new model of defense procurement. Cheap, rapidly producible, and effective. Nations worldwide took notice. Internationally, the attack triggered a fundamental reassessment of naval warfare doctrine. If unmanned surface vessels could sink frigates and submarines, what did that mean for aircraft carriers, cruisers, and amphibious assault ships? The United States Navy accelerated investments in counter-drone systems, electronic warfare, and autonomous defense platforms. NATO conducted emergency studies on swarm defense, and smaller navies, recognizing that expensive warships were vulnerable to cheap drones, began developing their own unmanned programs. August 4th didn't just change one battle, it changed how navies would fight for decades to come. What do you think was Russia's biggest defensive failure? The radar detection, the response time, or the lack of effective countermeasures? Share your analysis below. The technical lessons were profound. Traditional naval defense, built around detecting and destroying aircraft and missiles, struggled against surface drones. Radar systems designed to track targets at altitude had difficulty with small vessels riding low in the water. Fire control systems optimized for fast-moving threats couldn't track slow, erratic drones effectively, and the sheer number of attackers overwhelmed defensive systems designed for smaller raids. The solution, analysts concluded, required layered defense, better radar optimized for surface threats, more close-in weapon systems, and autonomous counter-drone platforms capable of engaging swarms without human intervention. For the drone operators scattered across Ukrainian territory and controlling their craft via satellite links, the attack was surreal. They watched through onboard cameras as their drones raced across dark water, dodging fire and homing on glowing targets. They felt the disconnect between their safe control rooms and the deadly impacts happening 200 kilometers away. Some operators experienced psychological distress, watching ships explode and knowing sailors were dying. Others felt grim satisfaction, knowing they were avenging Ukrainian losses. The ethical dimensions of remote warfare, where operators kill without physical presence, would be debated for years. But on August 4th, there was no debate. There was only mission execution. Russia's propaganda response was predictable, but ineffective. State media initially denied losses, claiming all drones had been destroyed. When satellite imagery showed sunken ships, the narrative shifted. The vessels were old and scheduled for decommissioning anyway. When crew casualty lists leaked, the story changed again. The sailors were heroes who died defending against NATO aggression. But none of it worked. The international community had watched the attack unfold through commercial satellite feeds. The evidence was undeniable. Russia had lost 6 warships to Ukrainian drones, and no amount of spin could erase that reality. For the families of the 94 Russian sailors killed, the propaganda was meaningless. Their sons, husbands, and fathers were dead, lost in an attack that military leaders claimed was impossible. Anger toward Ukrainian forces mixed with resentment toward Russian commanders who had assured everyone that Sevastopol was impregnable. Some families received compensation and honors. Others were ignored, their losses inconvenient reminders of a defeat the state wanted to forget. The disparate treatment fueled discontent within military communities, eroding trust between service members and political leadership. The attack also exposed Russia's technological gap. Ukrainian drones, while simple, incorporated GPS jamming resistance, mesh networking for coordinated attacks, and AI-assisted navigation. Russian countermeasures, designed to defeat NATO systems, struggled against low-tech but innovative solutions. The lesson was humbling. Advanced militaries, optimized for conventional warfare, could be blindsided by asymmetric tactics developed in garages and workshops. The Pentagon, watching closely, accelerated programs to counter similar threats. China took note, expanding its own unmanned naval programs. And smaller nations recognized that naval power no longer required billion-dollar fleets. As dawn broke on August 5th, Sevastopol harbor resembled a war zone. Smoke rose from burning ships. Rescue boats ferried wounded to hospitals, and salvage crews assessed the wreckage of what had been Russia's most important Black Sea naval base. The water, stained with oil and debris, would take weeks to clear. The psychological scars would last far longer. August 4th, 2025 became a date that marked the end of one era of naval warfare and the beginning of another. An era where unmanned systems, cheap and expendable, could challenge the most powerful fleets. Where technology mattered more than tonnage, and where innovation, not industrial capacity, determined victory. The Black Sea Fleet, once a source of Russian pride, was crippled. 6 major warships lost, dozens of smaller vessels damaged, infrastructure destroyed, and most critically, confidence shattered. Ships that survived the attack spent more time in port, fearful of operating where drones might lurk. Patrols were curtailed, missions were canceled, and the fleet's ability to influence events, already diminished, dropped further. Ukraine had achieved sea control not through conventional naval power, but through asymmetric innovation. And the world took notice. Now I want your strategic perspective. First, does this attack prove that traditional navies are obsolete? Or will countermeasures restore the balance? Second, should other nations invest heavily in naval drones? Or was this a unique situation unlikely to be repeated? Third, what ethical concerns arise when warfare becomes increasingly remote and automated? Leave your answers in the comments. Your insights shape the conversations we have here. And if this deep dive into the future of naval warfare gave you a new understanding of how technology is reshaping conflict, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to this channel, and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay informed, stay sharp, and remember that the most powerful weapons are not always the most expensive. Sometimes, they're the ones your enemy never saw coming.